Hello and welcome to the BTEC Nationals in Music Performance Unit 3 Ensemble Music Performance Support session. My name is Jeffrey Hull. I'm Subject Advisor for Music and Music Technology. In this video we'll talk through the task and just have a recap of that. Then we will look at each of the activities that learners are required to do in the task, and then finally go through and have a look at some useful links on the website as well. So looking at the task, learners need to respond to the choice of repertoire and develop the performance for an audience. There's 2 hours for activity 5 plus the stipulated time for the activities in 1, 2, 3 and 4. Learners will produce evidence for rehearsal where they need to contribute to a group rehearsal session, and that's worth 16 marks. There is a rehearsal debrief and that is worth 12 marks. There is the performance worth 24 marks. Stylistic presentation worth 16 marks, and then the critical review, which is worth 12 marks, so that's 80 marks in total. Looking at the rehearsal, there's a few things to think about when you are organising this and thinking about when your learners will be producing the evidence for the rehearsal. It's important to say that activities 1 and 2, so the rehearsal and the rehearsal debrief, need to be done before the end of March. So you need to factor in time to do that before the end of March, but also allow it to be sometime through when they're getting pieces together, so it's not at the very beginning of that period of time. So yeah, thinking about the timing of the rehearsal session is important. Don't arrange it when the arrangement of a piece isn't established, and avoid rehearsals where arranging parts is the main focus. What we are looking for is learners to be able to progress the music on during that rehearsal session, and think about how they're approaching it and what they need to do to improve the piece that they're working on. So in order to do that, it's important to teach rehearsal techniques, so learners aren't simply running through a piece over and over to try and make it better. They need to focus on specific sections or elements that need attention during that rehearsal. Taking the diagnostic approach to improving the piece, and looking at what needs to be done and how they're going to approach that. So learners need to show the development of the musical material in that rehearsal, and show how they are contributing to improving and moving that rehearsal session on as well. It's important to have musical knowledge of the piece and more widely so they can communicate with the other musicians in their group. And as it says, this needs to be shared during the rehearsals to support that development and show that they're understanding the musical elements and how they need to develop that in the rehearsal session. It's important to probably have a bit of a plan what the main focus of the rehearsal session will be before going in to create that video, and have an in-depth knowledge of the piece and the current development of the piece and where it's currently at and where they are aiming to go with that piece in the rehearsal. So the rehearsal debrief, what we want to avoid is just a recount of the rehearsal. It needs to focus on the skills and the techniques and the diagnostic approach that were taken in that. We don't want just a discursive account of what happened in the rehearsal. We want them to detail how to improve and develop. So avoid being very generalized in terms of things like we need to practice more. Instead, it could be we need to practice the transition from section A to section B because, and go into detail around why that needs to improve and how they're going to improve that. So learners need to demonstrate an understanding of specific musical areas for development. They can support that with references to techniques and the strategies to overcome the weaknesses. So they could look at things like if their timing is an issue, they could talk about rehearsing with a click track or something like that as well. So they need to draw upon examples from the actual rehearsal to confirm their goals. And it's equally valid to identify strengths in the session, and that could include their own personal rehearsal techniques and regime, or specific sections of the piece that have improved and explain how that was done. Quite often the videos, I think, in the rehearsal debrief can take a negative sort of view on the rehearsal and the situation of the piece, and we want to include the strengths in there as well, so it's equally as important to identify those. Learners need to consider their own and others' targets to develop the music and to develop musically, and having a logical progression and observation of that recorded rehearsal as well. They need to also look at the musical skills and the stylistic development in there as well. As I said, both this and the rehearsal need to be completed before the end of March, and it's really important the rehearsal debrief happens as immediately after the rehearsal if possible, if time allows. If not, it should be at the very beginning of the next session, because it needs to be fresh in the mind of the learner. So the ideal situation is they do the rehearsal and then they have a bit of time to gather their thoughts, make some notes, as they're allowed notes into activity 2 for the rehearsal debrief, and then go through that video of recording the debrief session. For the performance, learners should perform on their main instrument. What we want to avoid is learners playing on another instrument just for the sake of the arrangement. We want to see the learner demonstrate their best ability on their instrument. So that is really important to note in there. Accuracy is key to achieving mark band 3 and above. So we want learners to be able to perform accurately on the instrument that they are used to performing on, not just something that they can play as well for the sake of the arrangement in that group. So ensure that each member of the group can be clearly heard. It might take a bit of time with mixing and microphone positioning to make that happen, but it is really important to get that balance within the ensemble as they are performing. As a note, just to remind you that no doubling is allowed, so each learner has to have their own individual part, so it's got to be clear what part they are playing in there. It's advised that each instrument is given an opportunity to show their technical proficiency, so this could be through a solo section, for example. And if there are two instruments that are the same, ensure that there's contrasting parts so that each can be clearly heard and it's clear to distinguish which learner is playing which part. And then learners should select the repertoire carefully, think about how the piece can work for their arrangement and instrumentation and their ensemble. And arrangements must have a sufficient level of stylistic interpretation, so they need to be able to adapt that music into the style that they are working in. It is not just a straight cover version of the piece. that we're looking for. So minor rhythmic melodic changes rarely allow them to create this stylistic version. So they really need to be thinking about their stylistic elements and how they're changing that piece into the style and how to approach that. So as I've just said, yeah, learners need to consider that stylistic interpretation in their performance. And the final point there is about stagecraft, and learners need to consider this. This can be sometimes misinterpreted and detract from the proficient ensemble dynamics as well. So we want learners to be able to perform confidently and show that they're doing that and use appropriate stagecraft, but we don't want them to detract from the overall ensemble dynamics in there. The stylistic presentation. It isn't a review of the performance, so learners need to stay focused on what the activity is asking for, so don't get distracted from the focus of this activity. Learners need to consider both stylistic interpretation and the application of musical elements in this. Learners should be comfortable discussing techniques used on their instrument. They should be able to explain and demonstrate their stylistic interpretation, and learners should understand their musical decisions and explain these. And it's important to say that notes are not allowed in this activity. But what we are wanting, going back to one of the previous bullet points there about learners being able to demonstrate their stylistic interpretation, the intention is that learners do have their instrument there, so they are able to show and demonstrate some of these stylistic elements that they've used in their playing, and be able to demonstrate that and show that in the video for the stylistic presentation there. And finally, looking at the critical review, there are the focus points in the brief, and learners need to use these because these are what are assessed in this activity. So it's important to say don't deviate away from these focus points, which are the evaluation of your individual preparation, evaluation of your individual contribution to ensemble rehearsals, evaluation of ensemble communication in rehearsal and performance, evaluation of your individual role in the performance, the justification of your selection and application of musical skills using examples, and then suggestions on how the performance could be improved in future, providing those clear targets. So learners need to focus just on those points and don't deviate away from those, and try to avoid just anecdotal descriptions of things as they've gone through. Try to really focus on delving into how they've approached things and how to improve things, and what has gone well, what they could improve, and how could they improve that. So that's gone through each of the activities. Some of the useful things that you will find on the website to help support you and your learners with this unit. Really important, I think, is to read the latest examiner report. That includes good details around how centres have generally approached the task and good practice, and areas that need possibly some improvement, and it can also include how learners have approached tasks as well, and the activities in there. The other important document is the administrative support guide that details how to run the assessment in terms of the controls and what is allowed in each activity. So it's important to be familiar with that as well. On this slide, is just my contact details and the ways you can get in touch. So there is the contact form on the website. You can email me at teachingmusic@pearson.com. There is the phone number. There's the Pearson Music Community group, which you can join and ask any questions in there. And then finally, the final link on there is a link to my bookings page, which allows you to book a video call with me where you can ask questions about the delivery and any questions you have around qualifications as well. I hope you found this useful and wish you and your learners all the best with the assessment this academic year.